Dawn of War 4 sounds like it will have an absolutely epic army painter system. Really and truly, I am pretty flabbergasted about what is seemingly coming our way with Dawn of War 4. Basically, in a recent hour-long interview with Theysen from King Art Games, conducted by the Hobby Hotel and Chewy Painting, we got a surprisingly deep look at how customization in the game will actually work. Now, my previous video covered all the other bits and bobs that were discussed during the interview, but I wanted to make a video dedicated specifically to the army painter. And just as well, to be honest, because my previous video was already about 13 minutes long. Now, unfortunately, I don't actually have any footage about the painter, because all the information I've gathered is actually from the interview, but I'm sure in the future we may just get a sneak peek of it before release. Time will tell. Stay tuned to the channel, because I'm sure when they put more information about it, I'll be there ready to summarize it all for you. For now though, the B-roll in the background has just got to be the trailers and most recent gameplay footage we've got for Dawn of War 4. Anyways, before getting into the details, of which there are many by the way, it's worth talking about why an army painter matters so much in a Warhammer game. One feature I've been thinking about a lot from the older games is army customization, because everyone can paint their armies however they want. Ultimately, for Warhammer fans, painting and customizing armies isn't just like some sort of side activity. For most, it is actually the hobby. People spend countless hours building, converting, painting, weathering, and personalizing their collections. Even when two people collect the exact same faction, their armies can often look a little bit different in several different ways. Some people create their own Space Marine chapters, while others build custom guard regiments, forge worlds, warbands, dynasties, clans, or craft worlds. The armies kind of become a reflection of the player, and that's why army painters have always mattered in Warhammer video games. They essentially allow players to bring some of that hobby creativity into the digital space. Now, based on what Theysen described, Dawn of War 4 may be taking that idea further than any previous game in the series. In many ways, this feels like King Art Games is trying to reconnect Dawn of War with one of the most important parts of Warhammer culture, emphasizing the idea that these aren't just units on the battlefield. They are actually, well and truly, your units. Jan revealed that they in fact have two layers to this system, offering a basic painter alongside a highly detailed advanced painter. The basic painter is essentially an evolution of what previous Dawn of War games already had, where you define a set of colors that are applied across your entire army and your buildings. There are essentially slots that define where your colors are applied across your units and structures, managing your primary armor color, trim color, decal color, and other key material colors. Fundamentally though, the difference between something like the Ultramarines and the Dark Angels could simply be changing that primary armor color from blue to green, along with maybe some smaller detailing differences. With this system, you can very quickly create a completely custom army if you wanted. If you decide your entire force should be bright pink with whatever accent colors you want, you could do that, and the scheme will apply consistently across everything you field. Now, with Dawn of War 4's army painter, the game will still include the standard sub-factions, but you aren't locked into them at all, meaning everything can be freely overridden and customized. Compared to older Dawn of War games, the depth here is clearly going to be significantly increased too. Previous painters generally gave you a, handful of options, usually 3 main colors plus a few extras like eye glow, weapon glow, or badges. Dawn of War 4 though is going to expand that to around 12 separate slots. Now, that may not sound revolutionary at first, but for hobbyists, it's actually a pretty substantial leap forward. Instead of making compromises because multiple parts of a model are tied to the same color channel, you'll in fact with Dawn of War 4 gain a much finer control over individual elements. Jan specifically mentioned that helmet colors, for example, can be separated from body armor colors. So if you want white helmets on green armor, red helmets on black armor, veteran markings, company markings, or something completely custom, you'll have much more flexibility than previous Dawn of War games allowed. So that's the basic painter, but where things get kind of crazy is with the advanced painter, where it is no longer just army-wide customization. Instead, it operates at the level of individual models or individual unit types. You'll be able to take a specific unit, such as an orc boy, and customize it in a far greater amount of detail, styling specific squads differently and painting individual components. Now, whilst we haven't seen much of it shown publicly yet, the goal isn't simply to just let players swap colours around. The goal is to translate actual miniature painting techniques into a digital format. Jan said that internally, artists have already been creating designs and showing them to each other, and they are really excited to see what players create. For example, they looked at washes, which miniature painters use to darken recesses, grooves, and panel lines. In the game, these come as adjustable settings through sliders, allowing players to fine-tune exactly how recessed areas appear by controlling things like how strong the shadows are, how dark they become, what colour they take, and even whether those areas have special visual effects or glows. In other words, you're not just selecting a paint colour, you are controlling how that paint behaves. They also looked at dry brushing, which goes the opposite direction by emphasizing raised edges and highlights. On the miniatures, dry brushing brings out those top surfaces, and in Dawn of War 4, this can be represented through separate highlight materials and effects. Jan gave the example of armor, where your main surface remains painted, but worn edges could automatically expose bare metal underneath. So that means weathering effects, battle damage, and worn paint can become part of the active customization process rather than just being fixed static textures. You can create models that look worn, scratched, and realistically weathered without manually painting every detail. And that to me is really one of the most interesting aspects of the entire system, because it isn't just simply a color picker. It's an attempt to actually digitally recreate the logic of miniature painting itself. Layering, shading, washes, highlights, weathering, materials, these concepts are all being translated into interactive systems, which for hobbyists is a very different proposition from simply changing a primary color and calling it a day. Now, if this wasn't big enough, well, another massive feature that was mentioned alongside all of these was the ability to share designs, where players can easily export and share paint schemes with other players. Jan Theysen mentioned the idea of uploading a scheme to places like Discord or other places, allowing people to distribute their creations to the wider community so other players can simply copy the file into their game and immediately use that design. I can easily imagine people designing armies in-game and then using them as inspiration for their real tabletop armies. Imagine this: you are thinking about starting a new tabletop army, but aren't necessarily sure what color scheme you want. Instead of painting an entire physical test model, you might be able to actually prototype ideas in Dawn of War 4 first. Now this of course will create a really strong connection between the tabletop and digital experience. And to be honest, this wouldn't even be the first time that this has happened, because we already saw something pretty similar with Space Marine 2, where social media was full of players recreating chapters and inventing their own. But where things get even more crazy is that of course what Jan Theysen is describing sounds even more detailed with Dawn of War 4, and I can already imagine release day being filled with people sharing paint guides and showing off their custom armies. Now, all this high level of customization does actually raise one major question. Does this apply to the campaign too? Well, it's explicitly confirmed that actually, no, it doesn't. For the campaign, the factions are going to be keeping their canonical appearances, because it would be a bit strange if the Dark Angels suddenly weren't green anymore while pushing through the narrative. Instead, the painter is pretty much designed for skirmish, multiplayer, and the last stand mode. Now when it comes to multiplayer, I was a bit curious about that one because it could be a bit tricky on PvP game modes. I didn't fully get it from the interview, but if any of you guys did get more detail on that, let me know in the comment section below. I imagine when it talks about multiplayer that it's probably limited to the last stand game mode. Now when you put all of this together, it really feels like King Art Games gets something that a lot of RTS games just completely miss. In most strategy games, your units are basically disposable tools that you throw into battle to win, but Warhammer has always been a bit different. People get attached to their armies, they name their characters, build backstories, and spend hundreds of hours painting, tweaking, and personalizing every detail. The most interesting thing that Theysen talked about isn't really just the number of color slots, or the fancy weathering effects. It's in fact the idea behind it all. The whole system seems built around ownership, moving away from just commanding an army towards actually creating something that feels like it is completely yours. So if King Art Games pulls off everything they've described so far, I really do think that Dawn of War 4's Army Painter could end up being one of the most impressive Warhammer customization systems we have ever seen in a game. With the 70 plus campaign missions that can even be played cooperatively, 4 factions that look to play very different from each other, the Last Stand game mode, the Crusade game mode, and the new planned DLCs later on in the game's roadmap, it is really hard not to get hyped for Dawn of War 4. So if you are as hyped as I am about Dawn of War 4 and you enjoyed today's update, make sure to give the video a thumbs up. Now the obvious question that I really do have to ask you all is, which unit are you most looking forward to customizing and how are you going to customize it? Let me know, of course, in the comments section below. Now I will leave an end card on the right of your screen right now, taking you to a video covering the other bits and bobs from this very long interview. It might pique your interest. I'll also of course leave the full interview in the video description. As always though, take care and see you next time.